So last year, I joined the month-long art challenge called Mermay, where you're invited to illustrate a merfolk a day for the entirety of the month of May. This online community event challenges my creativity, and I love it just because it gives me an opportunity to design new character illustrations every day. It is a feat of character and creature designing in one illustration, and I will never pass the opportunity to paint glistening scales and elegant fishtails. It is my third year of joining, and it's my favorite self-indulgent art project ever. And I figured, since I won't be able to join this year, I might as well do a little tour of the Mermay series I did last year. Technically, this video would encompass artworks from 2023 to this year, as I am unable to work on this project for 30 days straight. My medium of choice for the challenge is digital art, so everything you'll see in this video is painted using a display tablet and a digital painting software. Also, these pieces aren't showcased chronologically, so some of these pieces were prepared and illustrated months ahead, and some of them were painted the same day I posted them online. So again, just to emphasize, I did not spend 30 days finishing fully rendered and polished illustrations. That is an inhumane thing to do, even for professional artists. One last thing, you can follow a prompt when joining art challenges like this. For Mermay, it's basically a list of illustration ideas assigned to each day of the month. If I can recall, there's an official one for Mermay. There are plenty of artists who make their own, and you can even make your own, where you can just wing it as you go. It's a handy tool, especially when you run out of things to draw or if you have burnout. I didn't follow any particular prompt for this challenge, but I do want to say that all of the characters I've painted in this video are a part of a personal world building project, which I plan to explore more in upcoming videos. All of these guys live in the same universe basically. This is only a small part of a bigger series, and I hope I can revisit these designs in the future. That being said, I think we're ready to begin the Mermay 2024 tour. Starting off is this piece. I love the traditional image of a half-fish, half-man hybrid, but for last year's challenge, I wanted to make sure I interpreted the merfolk concept a little differently. I wanted to do some sort of creature designing as well, so this piece was greatly inspired by leviathans or just any aquatic serpentine giant monsters. I am intrigued by the idea of a creature with the face of a human. It's the juxtaposition of something monstrous and unbelievable with the visage of something humane and relatable. This concept is prevalent in mythology and historical art, but it's something I've never explored in my art before. I wanted to convey the same feeling I have when looking at paintings of giant sea monsters accosting ships, conjuring giant waves and stormy clouds. I would say this piece is greatly emotionally driven. I'd like to think I was successful in portraying turmoil and conflict, and I think that monster design is pretty sick too. If I remember correctly, this piece was the first illustration I painted for this challenge, and this was actually in the backlog for months. This was gonna inform the art direction or aesthetic of the whole thing, but I ultimately scrapped that idea just because I didn't want to get sick of drawing the same thing over and over again basically, and I might burn out very quickly. My initial idea for Mermay 2024 is a bunch of pale-skinned mermen accompanied by pale-skinned sea animals on a deep black background. It's not a bad idea, and you will see some of that here, but I opted to keep the aesthetic more open and versatile than that. This merman has humanoid legs with features suited for aquatic life, which I explore a lot in this project, and he's riding on the back of a great white shark. It's pretty simplistic. I intended for this piece to look like a photograph taken with the flash on, kind of a cryptid caught on camera aesthetic. I think this was a successful illustration. Another diversion from what I would call a traditional merfolk. Like I said, I wanted to try my hand at designing creatures for this challenge, just to diversify and expand my portfolio if I ever decide I want to do conceptual work. The shell of a crab lends itself to so many great armor designs, and that's what jump-started this illustration. This character/creature is my interpretation of a crustacean hybrid, but I wanted it to look more humanoid than arthropod. So I kept the limbs at a minimum number, and I decided I could just transform the crab pincer into a weapon. I'm very proud of this design. I thought making the armor have a bubble helmet emphasized his amphibious biome, and I thought the overall silhouette and shape language was so strong. I love it for the sole reason that it's not a conventionally attractive human character like all the other characters I usually make. Instead, it looks agile and dangerous. It's one of the few instances where I actually put thought in designing a character. Like, I think this guy would look really cool in a video game. This was an attempt at creating a figure that's daunting and scary. I would have rendered this piece differently because the entire image just isn't as intimidating as I wanted it to be. The character is supposed to be a giant domineering squid monster. I may have been subconsciously inspired by the dragon nest scene from the movie How to Train Your Dragon, just because of the red lighting from below. I think I'm quite indifferent about this piece just because I like the idea, but I fumbled the execution. There's just no sense of scale here, if that was my vision. And some of his human body parts are poorly done, I would say, specifically his head angle and his knuckles. This was a result of going for a conceptual artwork but not doing the work of thumbnailing, practice sketching, and doing studies. I just opened the canvas, painted what I thought, and moved on with my life. Luckily, the piece was done within a day, so there's not a lot of effort and time wasted. Quickness and efficiency is also something I developed and improved in this project, and as time went on, I became more confident with my techniques and ideas. This was a miss, but that's okay. I absolutely loved working on this character from start to finish, and I rarely feel that way. The sketch was dynamic because all the lines were curvy and flowy. I think that's a secret ingredient to creating a successful mermaid design. Last year, I fell in love with the color royal blue, and you will see me incorporate that a lot in my recent pieces. That's why his blue skin is my favorite element in this artwork. I think it did a great job making it look rich and majestic. Speaking of, the idea I had in my head for this piece is I wanted to draw an elegant merman playing a stringed instrument. It's pretty straightforward, so I figured the best way to keep the illustration interesting is to add a lot of texture. In this case, the ornate patterns all over his fishtail, the lyre, and his headpiece. I think the embellishment and ceramic texture of the tail in contrast to this dark blue makes the design sophisticated. That being said, I'm not sure about the functionality of this tail. Is it supposed to be sturdy ceramic like I mentioned? Is it flexible like a garment made of rubber? I'm not really sure. I just know it looked pretty. That is an inconsistent thing you'll see in this project. Sometimes the designs are well thought out and practical, and most times I just draw it because it looks pretty. The tripod fish is actually what prompted this piece. I have been itching to illustrate it for forever now, so I did, and the merman just happened to be incidental. Basically, I had to draw the character to justify drawing the fish. I thought the subjects had solid and strong shaped language, with the tripod fish resembling a throne and the character elegantly sitting on it. The two of them had to share a common feature, and so I made sure to give them both matching scales and texture. I experimented with how to render iridescent skin, and it felt very rewarding to look at, especially after it came together in the final artwork. Another feature I liked about this piece is the alien look of the merman. I wanted the merfolk in this series to have distinct inhumane looks, and for this one, he has alien bug eyes, antennae, and fins for ears. Granted, I wasn't as consistent with it as you'll see, but still, I like how it looks. Overall, I love how flamboyant and glamorous this character looks. This one's fairly simple, but I still love it. The idea came about similarly to the previous one. I've been interested in illustrating ammonites for a while now, and I found the perfect opportunity to do so. I do want to say I'm unsure if that's the name of this particular animal. I just did some skim research and gathered some reference photos and started painting. Anyway, in cases I couldn't come up with interesting merman design, I made sure to include animals in the piece instead, even extinct ones. I think the best feature of this illustration are the movements of both subjects, specifically the merman's fins and tail, as well as the ammonite's tentacles. They're two completely different material, but I think they harmonize very well. One major thing I wish I had done differently though is the ammonite shell. I wish I took my time to properly form the spiral structure and its ridges. The angle just looks too awkward in my opinion, and since it's such a big element, it definitely draws your attention. Oh, and perhaps the spear too. Often you will see me freehand weapons for these merfolk for no reason. but I still like to add them because even if they're not weapons or functional design wise, I think adding them balances the paintings. I hope that's the case for this guy. Oh, and honorable mention, Merman's ears are so adorable. I love this one a lot. It's just so sophisticated in my opinion, and the pieces come together elegantly, especially the poses. It is intentional that even though the general color scheme of both figures are pale, I made sure to separate them by assigning them slightly different hues. Like you can tell the merman has a different texture from the leafy sea dragon. Speaking of, I've always been fascinated by these animals. They're closely related to seahorses, but they've evolved to have appendages that look like seaweed for camouflage. And I'm just a big fan of the naming convention, honestly. A relative of a seahorse that's called a dragon? That's pretty sick. Their shape and design is so fascinating, and this is an animal that's kind of underutilized in fantasy creature designing, in my opinion. I made sure to give the merman a matching crown made of leaves to keep the aesthetic cohesive. One thing I would probably change are the mini seahorses he's reaching out to. They're not a terrible addition, but it would be a better concept if they were surrounded by hundreds of seahorses, since they reproduce a lot anyway, but also to convey the idea that maybe this merfolk and his companion are figures of authority of some sort, that their subjects are parading and treading behind them. Not a bad illustration at all, and I really love that fishtail on him. And we got our first back view character illustration. I'm very satisfied with how this piece turned out, and the revisions I'm currently seeing are very minimal and I could live without. I do want to say that I am a huge fan of sharks, but I also didn't want to saturate this challenge with multiple pieces that are shark centric. I like this concept too much to not materialize it into an illustration, so I had to push through. The merman is fascinating to me largely because of the fin placements. I think even though he's mostly human, his design makes him hydrodynamic and agile in water, and I think his pose is pretty fierce too. I love the idea of a group of sharks circling a person without outwardly attacking them. It's a sick concept and how I interpret having to deal with doubts and inner turmoil. Looking back, I could have spent more time detailing several sharks, especially the ones in the foreground, because they look rather cartoonish in terms of art style. I don't intend for them to be hyper realistic, but a little more volume and texture would be great. Also, I think the concept would be scarier if there are more sharks in the backdrop, circling below the character. Overall, I'm proud of this one, and his design is one of my favorites. This is one of my favorite pieces in general from this project. It's rather simplistic, but I am very satisfied with the execution. The crouched, festering creature pose is what prompted this piece, and the focal point is the character looking over his shoulder, with half his face covered. I think this was a successful attempt at portraying a creature that is mysterious and potentially dangerous. I placed him atop a column as if he's laser focused and scouting his prey. In the background is a landscape of ruined architecture perched on top of rocks, presumably by the ocean. I initially wanted to include animals in this illustration, like a pod of whales flying in the back, and then a pair of sunfish circling the character, but I scrapped the idea entirely in the end. I thought it was more powerful that this character was carrying the energy of the piece with his pose alone, and I figured adding more elements would just take away from his quote-unquote aura. So that's why the royal blue backdrop remained empty. Another favorite element of mine is his dorsal fin slash spine that runs down his fishtail. I love this decision because it reminded me of Godzilla and his dorsal plates, but also it just adds interest to the rather plain backside and tail. I made sure to make his design very spiky to emphasize that he's dangerous. One of my favorites for sure. And here's one of the best artworks in this series. Definitely another personal favorite of mine. The shape of the tail is so interesting and unique for me. I remember finishing this sketch and thinking, yeah, this is gonna be a fabulous character. His boa is supposed to emulate some sort of fan coral, and it made an interesting silhouette for his upper torso, especially with his arm reaching out like that. I had a few passes for the tail before I decided to go with a vertical action line, but I still wasn't sure how to make the overall design balanced. I thought it was too top heavy, And then I tried to draw his caudal fin in a fanned out shape that bends backward, and I knew I hit the jackpot with this design. After finalizing the silhouette of the character, figuring out the texture was the next challenge, and since I got bored of drawing the same monochromatic merman, I figured I should add some color to this one. Since I'm not following the conventional design of merfolk anyway, I thought I could opt for a more alien concept for this one, with weird ridges and cavities on his chest and tail. What if his interior is made of inorganic material that glows blue? Perhaps it's magic or some sort of alien substance and it's peeking through the open holes in his skin? We don't know, but I think it makes his design more sci-fi leaning. I think this design can stand alone as a strong illustration, but I had to add some finishing touches to the piece, such as the blue sword hovering on top of him. The fish isn't the prey that he just caught, it's actually a part of the blade itself, almost transforming it into a half sword, half mallet type weapon. I am very proud of the design choices on this one. This one's pretty awesome too, even though it's one of the least well received pieces from the challenge. The people who like my work aren't really fond of creatures with human heads, but I still make them anyway. This is another serpentine creature inspired by mythological sea monsters from history, and I emphasize this by putting a warrior headpiece on his head, which is inspired by a Roman centurion helmet. I'm afraid to call it that since I didn't do much research on it regarding its purpose and meaning. He looks regal in my opinion, and I made sure his design looked like an ancient sculpture with pronounced claws and fine details and an exaggeratedly long serpent body. This was a solid illustration, and I'm okay with the fact that it's not as quote-unquote popular as the other pieces in this series. I also recall cramming and rushing to finish this piece because I forgot I needed to post something that day and I had to whip something up very quickly. I'm not sure if this took less than 8 hours, but I'm confident I finished it within half a day. It's such an easy concept to do and I didn't want to spend time conceptualizing since I was in a hurry. This is actually the kind of quality of work I would do if I actually treated Mermay as a daily challenge. Not much thought and research and just drawing as you go. But then again, I'm very satisfied with this one. Okay, I know this looks just like a rehash of the very first artwork I showcased in this video, but I made peace with that. I just love the concept of people on ships and boats traversing the ocean and being confronted by violent waves and sometimes sea monsters. Was this an excuse to reuse the same concept and draw a hot guy? Maybe, but I think the painting is successful regardless. I guess the workaround I found is that instead of a serpent leviathan, I'll just draw a tentacled kraken type merman. There are more dexterous appendages that could pose as a threat to our little fisherman. Speaking of which, I'm unsure about the logistics and safety of bringing a rickety fishing boat out in the open waters like this, but I guess that's the conflict I was going for anyway. He didn't know about the horrors of the unforgiving seas, or maybe he's just ignorant enough to traverse it anyway. I also love the movement of the waves on this piece. I'd say this is a massive improvement from the previous illustration of the same concept. I think the waves make more sense, and the sense of scale is more intimidating and scary. I think the flying birds were the perfect finishing touches too. Now everything I showed so far are from 2024, but now we're gonna flash forward to this year where I explored some more traditional merman designs. Like I said, the timeline for this series is inconsistent because I was unable to complete the full 30 days last year, and I'm basically just catching up. The next 6 designs were illustrated this year, but they're absolutely a part of the series. I stopped doing mermaid illustrations after May last year, so when I got back to this project earlier this year, I figured the best way to get acclimated back to the theme is to go back to some basics. This is a very basic merfolk design, and I'm going back to some monochromatic colors too. I would say the focal point of this illustration is his pose. I think I'm really liking how my art style is developing, especially with the things that I prioritize when it comes to my process. In this piece, I would say the movement and flow of the character are the highlights. The shape of his hair and fishtail are so majestic, and now I make sure that even the limbs of my character aren't rigid and stiff. If you can detect the action lines of his pose, I make it a point to not have any straight lines in there. I think I do this practice mostly when I create simplistic designs to at least keep the illustration interesting. Oh, and this was completed within half a day as well. This was a perfect practice piece. This was a follow-up to the previous piece. It's pretty simplistic, but I think I had to produce this artwork no matter what. I think my goal for this one is to illustrate a merfolk with exaggerated hair and matching tail. I think I was inspired by the 90s blowout hairstyle where women's hair specifically were voluminous and overstated. Lots of big curls and waves, and I wanted to put a merman in that hairstyle somehow. I also made sure to make him as feminine as possible, just because I feel like it'd be sacrilege to do a mermaid themed art project and not have some display of flamboyancy. At least in my culture, where the mermaid imagery has strong relation to queerness and femininity, but that's another topic I'm unqualified and uninformed to talk about. Again, his hair has high volume and billowing in the currents, and they have a plastic quality to them. Reminds me of how cartoonish drag queen wigs are. I really love this diva. This is an interesting design. I was wondering how I can illustrate another white merman design, but I didn't want to draw another pale skinned character. I found a workaround, which is to draw a dark skinned character wearing an all white outfit. I made sure to make his face and likeness visibly melanated, but his outfit is stark white. His outfit is like a bodysuit that's form-fitting and is giving the illusion that it is a garment that is connected to his tail. I like that design choice of making his tail look like it's detachable, especially the rings around some parts of it. Another design where functionality kind of took a backseat in favor of cosmetics. I do love the small detail of having his nails sharp and painted blue to match the backdrop. I initially wanted to draw ornate patterns on his tail, but I felt like it would make the character visually crowded. If there's one thing I would revise though, it would be his caudal fins. I wanted it to look artificial and inorganic, so it's very symmetrical and not free-flowing, like the rest of the merfolk tails I've showcased so far, but it's not working for me honestly. It's clashing with his flowing hair too much, and I wish I had designed his tail to be a barrel type material with an open end, where his actual fishtail could be exposed. I don't know if that description makes sense, but yeah, I wish I made this tail more free-flowing. But other than that, the human torso is pretty solid and unique, at least for this series. I'm pretty excited for this one because this is actually a redraw of a painting I did back in 2021. I wasn't running out of ideas for Mermay per se, but I thought redrawing an old illustration could be an interesting project, and it would still fit the Mermay series. I also did this because I'm curious as to how I've evolved as an artist, how I tackle digital painting, how my techniques have changed, and how I apply fundamentals to my aesthetics. I think the difference is quite drastic. The art style change itself is subjective and I can't say an unbiased opinion about it, but I am confident that I have definitely improved as an illustrator. My knowledge on anatomy is better now, especially with the proportions. How I use color in my art is also stylized now instead of choosing flat color palettes, and I think my compositions now are more solid. All the things I put on the canvas are more intentional now. The original painting is supposed to emulate a vintage photograph or pin-up illustration. The character even had a 90s hair with the middle part. Unfortunately, the anatomy is too wonky and I'm not a fan of the rendering of his face. I chose to redraw this because I thought the fishtail was so beautifully drawn, but I didn't like his human torso and the way his arms were posed. I was also reluctant about this fishtail, specifically if I wanted to emphasize his scales and make it glisten, but I ultimately chose to make it rather flat and mildly textured instead. Didn't want it to be the star of the illustration, so his human half and fish half had the same level of rendering and detailing. I retained the rock from the original backdrop and added some flowers to his head. I'm really happy with this redraw, it's a vast improvement for sure. This is a cute one and a back to form with the theme of mermen and their cute animal companions. I suppose in this universe, freshwater and saltwater fish live within the same biome, so it's not an excuse that goldfish are coexisting with these merfolk. That's just the world building of this project. I will say though, the rendering of this piece is not my favorite. Something about the shading of the merman specifically leaves me hanging. It feels unfinished even though I really can't force myself to render him any further. I just know that I have to put the pen down. The goldfish is the star of this piece anyway, and I think I painted a really adorable fish. They have matching fin shapes, and I think that's really cool. It's also an illustration where movement and action line is my priority. I really love how the elements flow. Looking at it now, it's very simple, but I think it's a sweet illustration. It's very cute, and I like his sleepy expression too. This is actually one of the last illustrations I painted for this series. This was greatly inspired by the piercing illustration. I wanted to draw another merman with the hollow body design with cavities showing blue magic or substance underneath them, and I think his chest scars lend themselves to the design. It works so beautifully, and I think I managed to tread the line between fantasy and sci-fi for this illustration. I also like the decision to make his tail chromatic or iridescent. I think it complements the vibrant blue magic. I tried a different shading technique for this one and I'm unsure if it's visible to other eyes, but there's something about this rendering style that feels rather unfinished. Maybe it needs more bounce light on the shadows or something, perhaps some strong highlights. I'm not really sure, but I'm only satisfied with it anyway due to the fact that this was a quick illustration. This was finished under 12 hours, even lesser I think. I decided to make his caudal fin translucent instead of opaque and detailed because I didn't want it to take the center stage. It's an accessory more than anything, and since it's occupying a big space on the left side of the canvas, I decided to give him a staff to hold. I think it's so cute that this staff is a fishtail. I'm unsure about its purpose and functionality, but it's a pretty cute design. This painting actually has a companion piece, not necessarily a two-parter kind of thing, but more so showcasing characters in the same format. This first one is not my favorite of the two, but I think it's still pretty solid. His armor definitely has resemblance to East Asian design, but that wasn't intentional. I think it's more so his pose and stature that's accentuating that idea, but they're actually supposed to emulate Finn's more than anything. It is kind of surprising that the conception of his armor design is pretty swift. I'm shocked it didn't do more passes, but what's understandable is his dragon companion. I wanted to draw an actual Leviathan monster for this series, not just as a merman, but a standalone creature design. It went through so many variations of skull shapes and head angles, but I eventually settled on a snake shape with draconic features such as fins and whiskers, and a more narrow snout and jaw. I think the creature design is successful for how simplistic it is, and I'm very proud of the rendering of its mouth specifically. I didn't want to add spikes or additional fins because it would be too busy on the eyes. I am unsure if I captured its size appropriately though because it's supposed to be a giant creature. Something tells me the scale comparison is successful in making him monstrous in size, but I'm not really sure. My instinct is not telling me to revise anything else in this, so I must have thought correctly. His spear design is pretty sick too. Now on to my favorite between the two warriors. This guy rocks. It's one of my favorites just for the fact that it's very different from my usual work. The centerpiece of this illustration is his armor most definitely. The armor is greatly inspired by several marine life. The shape of his headpiece is inspired by a hammerhead shark. The spikes are all reminiscent of fish skeleton and bones. And the iridescent sheen on the armor is derived from bobbit worms. And the overall shape language of the armor piece too, I would say. I'm very proud of the creative choices I made for this character. Visually, it's very strong, although honestly, the functionality is still undetermined. I just convinced myself that his joints aren't obstructed and his body parts that need protection are actually protected. The thing is, too, when creating something this detailed and uniform, symmetry would be a helpful tool. So if I wanted this armor to work, I should have started with doing thumbnails and mirroring my sketches, just to ensure that the armor works and makes sense. But visually, I think this is pretty cool. It's something I would love to see modeled into a 3D render someday. he would look great as a video game character. Now, I would love to revise his blade though. The hilt itself is pretty dope and portrays this character very well, but you can tell I got lazy with the blade design. It looks like I used the symmetry tool to save some time, and I just did some preliminary shading and lighting. I wish I exerted more effort with it, but it's fine. The fish behind him serves the same purpose as the serpent from the previous artwork. It's a monster companion and is honestly just for decoration. You can tell I didn't care about its accuracy because the skeleton doesn't and shouldn't make sense. My excuse is that this is a ghost fish inhabiting a Frankenstein skeleton of a serpent slash fish. I love the idea, but I wish I put more thought into it. Luckily, I enjoy the warrior's armor enough for me to overlook these elements. I really love this illustration. Definitely a highlight of this challenge for me. One of the very first illustrations I developed for this series and the artwork I was most excited to work on. I've had the sketch for a while and it was so different compared to what the final piece turned out to be. My initial idea was a gigantic merman emerging from the depths alongside thousands of oarfish, and in the foreground is potentially an average-sized human being confronted by the sight. I think I prefer the illustration that it evolved into. Instead of the character being half fish, I made him more human now, and his clothes are heavily inspired by the oarfish. And instead of the piece taking place underwater, I chose to make the horde of creatures emerge and float out into the surface. The title of the artwork is perfect. It's brooding and strange and ominous, which is fitting considering the mythology of oarfish and what they represent in some cultures. Oarfish are deep-sea animals for the most part, and when they rise to the surface, natural disasters like earthquakes and tsunamis follow suit. A rational explanation is that apparently they are sensitive to seismic activity, so they can sense earthquakes. What I thought for the longest is that some of them rise to shallow waters because they're dying, and it's not uncommon for dying sea life to breach the surface and sometimes end up on land. Regardless, I thought their prophetic attributes make them cool as hell. The merfolk character accentuates this concept as well. I purposefully made his attire kind of religious, and he's also holding a horn to really push the idea that he's a harbinger of sorts. This is also one of the few pieces where I felt like I had to include a backdrop. I included a landscape of buildings and structures to emphasize his size as well as the oarfish. I thought of including crowds of people just for scale, but I'm content not including that idea. What's about to transpire is pretty clear, and I like that ominous tension. The previous three were done last year, and they're the few artworks that bookended the Mermay challenge just because of how large in scale they feel thematically and conceptually. As traditional sketches, meaning I drew the sketches and designed them on paper, scanned them, and then painted over them digitally. The idea continues now, but these next two are more recent, and they were created specifically for my world building project. A mermaid themed art challenge wouldn't be complete if I didn't include creepy deep sea creatures, right? I've actually had several ideas for a siren type character, but I eventually settled on the idea of an anglerfish, which are animals who use bait to lure their prey. I imagined his sentience and consciousness is stored in his human body, but they are one singular living being, which is why there's a host tethering the merman to the fish. I think of the anglerfish as his external jaw. He's supposedly a significant character in my project, kind of like a boss in a video game type character. I imagine he would be conquering a deep sea region, and his main power is expelling blinding lights and dispersing electric shockwaves, eliminating all life around him. Anyway, I made sure to make the design elements on the anglerfish worn out and tattered to emphasize his ancient age and the damage he has endured from battling many foes. I really like this design. This character has the same purpose as the previous one. He is another significant figure in my world building project, and I imagine his domain would be on the surface of the open water instead of the deep sea. I think he would also release rays of light that petrify all creatures around him, but instead of expelling electric shockwaves, I think he would be whipping his extremely long tentacles and inject potent venom into his foes and prey. He would inflict plenty of damage to multiple targets at once. Now about his design, I think his merfolk design could be better. As you'll see, I have plenty of iterations of his humanoid body. I explored a design where he has legs, and a design where his arms are posed differently. I don't know, I just had a hard time thinking of an elegant pose that complemented the idea. The idea is that he's a godly being that conjured up a protective armor that shields him from attack, but is also capable of inflicting it. Even if he's a lethal character, I didn't want him to be the centerpiece of the design. I want his quote unquote weapon to take center stage, and his weapon is his floater tank jellyfish. If you haven't realized it yet, the creature he's inside of is my interpretation of a Portuguese manowar, which is a venomous siphonophore. I love the concept of it having a floater device so it can drift on the surface of the ocean, and the design is so ingenious considering it's an invertebrate. In my design, the manowar is a weapon that's an extension of the merman's body. It makes him an indestructible warship slash submarine. He is a formidable conqueror of the surface. I think every illustration so far has been a breeze to paint. Some of them I finished in less than a day, and some of them took longer to finish. This one took maybe 3 weeks maximum. This is another piece that was conceptualized very early on, even months before. I made this illustration with the intention of making a portfolio piece. I wanted to do something that showcases my skill with character designing, creature designing, backdrop rendering, and even doing conceptual work with actual narrative. It's largely inspired by video game splash art, or even illustrations done for tabletop RPGs such as Magic the Gathering. I've never done personal artwork with this much detail and elements. I usually just draw a character and move on with my day. This one, even though it's still largely free-handed, the ideas here are still purposefully thought out in my opinion. The composition, the consideration of foreground, midground, and background elements, the lighting and shading, the areas of visual arrest and areas with extensive detail. Also, one of the few pieces on here that kind of tell a story. This feels like an invasion of sea creatures, with this domineering aquatic general heralding the attack. Like I said, all of the designs here are free-handed, meaning I didn't do research on them, didn't do multiple sketches for the armor, the weapons, and the creature designs, but somehow it still works for me. They all look like they belong in the same army, despite the fish grunts looking rather cartoonish compared to the general. I was so proud when I finished this, even though this wasn't done in one sitting. For a while, I valued the spontaneity and frequency of producing art quickly. I forget there's great value in taking your time and being reassured with your brushstrokes. I love this piece a lot, and I'm proud to make him a mascot and centerpiece of this project. The next 5 illustrations are taking a hard left turn as far as theme and purpose in the project. They're paintings depicting gay couples. Like I said, the imagery of mermaids in Filipino culture formed a connotation related to queer identity and femininity. I think its roots were derogatory, but I think it recently blossomed into something reclamatory. I am unqualified to relay the thesis of this cultural development, so I'll just do my best to give a very surface level and personal explanation of what inspired me to paint these pieces instead. This first one is my least favorite illustration from this Mermay series, for sure. The idea was absolutely better in my mind, and the execution fell short. I imagined this to be more heavenly and serene than how it looks now. I think it's the composition that's falling short actually. I think if you crop this from the middle part to the top part, it would look significantly better. I wanted to shoehorn the merman's tail so bad, even though I struggled with rendering its interaction with the water and sand. It just took away from the supposed focal point. I do love the color grading in post-edit, and the cloudy landscape looks pretty too, but I wish I had done things differently for this one. This one is a significant upgrade from the previous artwork. This painting is one of my favorites from this series. It's very simplistic, but I'm very proud of the execution. The prompt for this illustration is rather unconventional, if I recall. I envisioned a window on a white wall, which is just the white color of the canvas, and then the silhouette of the two characters. I thought of a 90-degree angle square, And then I tried a round window frame, but I ultimately decided on a window of a ruined structure by the sea, and it's on a tilted perspective. I think this worked best because, as you'll see, I struggled a lot with the pose for the merman. I was unsure how to make his pose interesting without compromising his profile, because I want to make sure that I preserve the eye contact between the two characters. Another thing I love in particular is the merman's tail. It's so simple, but I like the flow of it, and it looks like it's hanging off the canvas. This is one of those moments where I had to reserve myself from overdrawing and accepting that less is more. A fishtail with a complex design would take away from the character's interaction, and I think the intention worked in the end. Also, that blue is just too mesmerizing. I'm really glad it's a running theme in this project. This is my favorite composition in this series. The last two illustrations were drawn last year and they were middle entries if I can remember. These next two were drawn this year and you can clearly see the change in my art style. I won't point out the specific elements, but I'm happier and more confident with my vision and techniques now. Anyway, this painting was supposed to be posted in 2024, but again, I just couldn't make it in time unfortunately. I remember reaching the midpoint for this painting and then eventually I just stopped drawing anything mermaid related for the rest of the year, so this artwork was a stagnant work in progress for a long while. Anyway, I love incorporating sci-fi elements with openly fantastical settings with fantastical characters. I just love the contrast so much and I hope to keep the same magic consistent throughout the rest of the project that I'm gonna do in the near future. I didn't intend for this to be as somber as it is. I thought for sure this was kind of a retrieval operation kind of thing where this soldier is rescuing this merman and he is enamored while the merman is somber and perhaps asleep, not outwardly crying. I do not like that they're both crying, but I'll stick with it. I love the mecha suit design of the soldier even though there are revisions I'd like to do. I love how absurdly large the hands and legs are, although I did have to shrink both his legs just a tad bit to make the overall illustration more balanced. The design and the composition is stronger now, I think. And I like that the merman's hair matches the shape language of his caudal fins. I think it subconsciously breaks down the artificial feeling of the illustration because of the armored soldier. And I think I need to get more creative with amphibious mecha robots. Surely there are other ways I can make a helmet that isn't just a fishbowl essentially, but this is fine. It's a stylized painting more than it is conceptual art. I really like how this turned out. And we have another redraw. Well, not a redraw per se, but more like a repurposing. I have had this piece as a work in progress for 4 years now. I started it in 2021 and just got around to it again for this series. The first concept, as you can see, is more of a summer themed pin-up illustration. It's just a scene of guys lounging around by the pool, enjoying their cold beverages. The character on the left is human and the two guys in the center are merfolk. The setting is supposed to be in a condominium resort location, so the mid-ground has umbrellas and plants, and I wanted the backdrop to have skyscrapers. I think at the time I had a hard time rendering because I was technically in my second year taking digital art seriously, so the process was far too tedious and laborious. I wasn't used to painting a full scene with multiple elements, so I took a break from it and eventually I just forgot about it entirely. Until now, when I started to develop my own world building project, and I figured this would lay a foundation for a cute slice of life illustration of the world they live in. To keep the pose of the human character with some mild revisions, but I did change his skin color to turn him into a merfolk. I kept the merman and changed his hairstyle, and I made the call to remove the other merman situated behind him to make way for the landscape. Speaking of, I thought I could finally add some buildings and structures as an exploration of this world's aesthetic. I like the look of ancient arches, columns, pillars, and even bridges, so that's a prominent imagery you will see in this world. I don't intend for them to be flat, plain, and minimalist because I think this universe deserves its own art language and aesthetic for decoration. It's just that simplified shapes are what I can do for now. I do love the building behind the merman. Kinda looks like a microphone. Or the back of a window air conditioner unit. I love the idea of modern looking infrastructures, but making sure a part of it looks illogical and non-functioning. That's why the bottom of the building looks like it shouldn't be able to hold up all that weight. I really love this piece. And we've arrived to the final artwork of the Mermay series, the centerpiece of the challenge and my personal magnum opus, I would say. This is an artwork I'll forever be proud of. If I were to be asked what my best work of art is, it would be this. If I were to entice other people into being patrons of my work, this would be the piece I would showcase. I wanted to do an artwork that references an iconic painting from the past, and I chose Gustav Klimt's painting The Kiss. I wanted the focal point of this illustration to be the intimate gesture between the two characters. Everything else should be an accessory. I approached this painting more traditionally, at least with their skin. I have to say I think I did my best skin rendering in this artwork. You can see the rough brushstrokes, but I think I managed to make the skin lifelike. These are also the best pairs of hands I've ever painted in my life. I think they're so delicately painted. I also think the rest of the piece is equally interesting, and it's much more abstract than the two characters. I like that the human cloak is a portal to an underwater scene of some sort. There's plenty of fish coming out of it, as well as some sea plants. I love the flow and energy of the merman's hair and tail. It makes the piece more dramatic, and I don't know if this makes sense, but it provides vertical shapes in this piece where the general movement is horizontal, and that's largely thanks to the fish swimming to the right. Apart from the kissing gesture, I also wanted to capture the eccentricity and vibrance of Klimt's painting. I like that instead of weird colorful patterns, I painted fish instead. I took my time with this piece, but it didn't feel like it took a long while to complete. I enjoyed creating every element of this illustration. It's the highlight of this mermaid challenge and of my art journey in general. So that concludes my 2024 Mermaid Challenge series. But as a bonus, I figured I should also preview some more paintings I've done the year prior. These were drawn for Mermaid 2023 and I finished them at the tail end. I didn't intend to do the full challenge, that's why I only have a few entries. These illustrations weren't initially a part of the personal project I was talking about, but they definitely set the foundation for the art direction and style I envisioned. Let's just do a quick run through of these paintings, shall we? This first illustration is fairly simple. My favorite parts are the pose of the arms and the very long fishtail. The face angle is a tad bit wonky and weird, and the shading on the chest could be better. It's not bad, but it could be better. A lot of people like this illustration, which I'm very happy about. I think in terms of face structure, he's one of the prettiest characters I've ever drawn, but I think his fishtail takes center stage for sure. The giant caudal fin is one of the highlights, I would say, and fun fact, the element that took the longest to render for this piece are the scales on his tail, which is bizarre because you can't even see it. I think even though this is close to perfect, I would change his right pectoral muscle though. It should be stretched instead of fluffing up, if that makes sense. But overall, pretty good illustration. This is the first time in the first illustration where my interpretation of merfolk diverged completely. Instead of one singular fishtail, I kept his humanoid knees and painted fins and flippers instead of feet. It's such a cool idea and a fresh way to diversify the design conventions of my characters. I love how soft the backdrop is as well, although I'm not sure why I decided to add a ton of fish in the concept, but I'm happy they're there. I love this one a lot. It's rather simple, but I'm happy with the design. Well, partially. I think his human half is alright. I think he looks too bare for how flashy and extravagant the tail is. I could have painted some more accessories or something, but like I said, the tail is the star here. I love the movement and how it coils, and the caudal fin fanning out into an interesting shape. I think he looks very elegant. Another merman with two legs and an additional fishtail on his rear end. This is such a fun take on a merman and I'm happy with the execution. I really love the pose on this one. The arms are so dynamic and daunting, and the flow of his hair and the gentle movement of his tail kind of breaks the rigidity of his limbs. I think this is the most epic one from this batch. I think this is the most outwardly morbid piece on this series. Probably the most vicious depiction of merfolk in this video thus far. I love the flashed photograph look and the sparkly fishtail, although that face could use some revising, just a little. And that rock has some exquisite rendering. I must have been having a great day when I painted that. I like it. This is the first Mermay entry of this entire video where I discovered I'm a huge fan of the royal blue color, and it looks majestic in harmony with some pale and tan colors. The silhouette of the merman is my favorite part of this illustration. I think he looks majestic. It's my first time rendering this hairstyle and I think it's fairly successful. I will say his anatomy is a little uneven. I'm not sure if you can even notice it, specifically his legs, but I've accepted it. I'm aware of it, but I had to sacrifice it because I want to keep the cross-legged shape, but I also want to keep his upper torso tilted. I love making creative decisions like that. It makes me feel like I know what I'm doing. I wanted this illustration to be scarier and more ambitious than this. This is just a character design painting. I wanted this backdrop to be darker, and this merman is supposed to be gigantic. I wanted to portray that by drawing whales and even tiny human divers for scale comparison. Ultimately, I had to scrap that idea because I didn't want those elements to take away from his silhouette. This is pretty solid though. He's cool looking, I guess. And for the final illustration, I'll be showcasing in this video another intimate piece from 2023. This was actually painted around September for some reason. I forgot what prompted me to paint another merman piece, but I'm happy it materialized. This actually had an entirely different color palette, but I recently modified it so it can fit this series. I think it's more compelling now compared to when it had muted, earthy tones. My favorite part of this painting is the clear water near the light source, as well as the rendering on the night sky. They're kinda minute details, but I like how they look. Overall, solid piece and a cute closer to this video. I'm very proud of the collection of artworks I produced for this project, and they may be mostly self-indulgent, but I think they benefited me in the end because I can see how much I've grown as an artist. I think my techniques and my aesthetics have developed into something unique to me, and I'm hoping I can revisit these artworks in the near future too. This won't be the last time I will be illustrating merfolk for sure. Like I said, they're a part of my little world building project, so this is probably not the last time you'll see the rest of these folks. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again next time.